What would you do if you get out there and find nothing? This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 11 of season 6, and we're continuing our series about found footage with a discussion of the film Europa Report.
Well, I am going to start us off with just a few details about the movie Europa Report, and I'll probably talk just a little bit about the plot, just in case there are listeners out there who have not watched this film yet. If you haven't watched it, you can always pause us and go watch it if you're worried about spoilers. I think all three of us watched this on Amazon Prime. So the movie Europa Report came out in 2013. And it was directed by Sebastian Cordero, and the writer of the script is Philip. I'm assuming it would be Galat, maybe Galat. I'm probably massacring the name, and I apologize profusely. And this is, of course, a found footage documentary, or found footage mockumentary, I guess you would say. The premise of this is that a group of international astronauts, scientists, are being privately funded by this Project Europa, and they're building off of something that happened in real life, which was the 2011 discovery of water beneath the ice of Jupiter's moon, Europa. And I mean, I remember when that happened because everybody was excited that it, means that if there's water, then possibly there's life of some sort. So you have these kind of alien seas on this moon that could be explored somehow. Europa Report is kind of science fiction because it takes that premise of something we know in real life, that there's a possibility of life on this moon of Jupiter, and basically says that this company starts this Europa project to fund a long-term kind of long-distance space trip. So this is going to be the furthest humans have gone into space, and this group of people are going to Europa to investigate. So they're supposed to go there. It's going to take them like 22 or 23 months to get there. They land, they then crack a hole in the ice basically by drilling, and then send some submersibles down there to kind of see what they see. And they may find life, they may find nothing, but I think you guys, even if you haven't watched the movie, can figure that they probably find something, or else why would they make this movie? And so the gist of it is that you're watching a documentary that the Europa Project made of the footage that they got from this group that they sent out. So after I think it's like 6 months, maybe 9 months, they have an emergency. All communication is cut off with mission control, and they're thought to be lost, but they're not. And they just kept recording everything because they were supposed to record everything, audio, visual, there's cameras all over the place. And so at the moment when basically the gist of the movie is that they one by one either pass away because of space issues you have in space, obviously, things breaking, accidents, whatever. And then when they get to Europa, something is picking them off one by one. Eventually they can get communication restored, and they send all the footage. And so the company then, and the head scientist in charge, they make this kind of documentary, putting the footage together to kind of show what happened. And so from the very beginning that none of the people made it back, but you also know that this footage made it back. And so through the footage being put together kind of like a puzzle, you get to know these people, basically. I watched Europa Report for the first time at some point last year. I think it was like last fall or maybe the beginning of winter. And this had been on my radar for a while. Like when it was on Netflix kept recommending it to me, and I just kept putting off watching it. And so finally I was like, okay, I'm going to check this out. And I really enjoyed it. I love the idea of like the fake documentary. I liked the way the footage was put together, kind of like a puzzle. So it's not necessarily chronological. I really cared about the characters. I mean, I know we're just kind of watching them go about their business, but I feel like the characters were really fleshed out just because of the way that we see their relationships with each other. So yeah, I mean, this was one of the movies I kind of threw into the discussion when we were talking about doing found footage, because I thought it was kind of cool to give it like a space angle, which is something that we have not talked about so far with found footage. So Matt, Lisa, I'm assuming that this is your first times watching Europa Report. What are your impressions? And did my attempt at a plot summary of disjointed events make sense?
To answer your second question first, yes, it did make sense, at least for me having watched the movie. One of my only criticisms of the movie is that it is kind of told out of order with some of the footage, and there are some things that are hinted at that I almost feel like it would be better and more powerful if it was revealed organically, like chronologically. But overall, I did enjoy this movie quite a bit, and it's not a major criticism. If anything, it's just kind of a minor critique, if you will. But to answer your first question, this was my first time watching Europa Report. Literally watched it yesterday, the day before we recorded this, and I like I said, I really enjoyed it. I feel like one of the problems that we've talked about with found footage is how the the scenario for why people are always recording it comes off as a little bit forced or a little bit contrived. And I found myself thinking while watching this, well, this just makes sense. You know, why wouldn't they be constantly recording everything on a space mission to the furthest reaches that humans have ever gone to? Of course, that makes sense that there would be cameras everywhere documenting and recording the actions of the astronauts, as well as them kind of doing, you know, the reality TV style confessional to the camera kind of thing. And I mean, it of all the found footage ones we've discussed so far, I think this is the one that feels the least contrived for that reason, to explain why there's cameras recording every single thing. And yeah, just thought, well, of course, space. It makes sense. And yeah, I'm not going to go too much in more in depth with than just say that I really did like it. I thought it captured the claustrophobia of the space travel really well, because the ship is fairly small and everyone's kind of crowded in. I think there were only what 5 or 6 astronauts aboard, but still, I mean, it's a pretty compact space. And I mean, I've never been to space, obviously, but it felt very realistic to me, and I thought that was another good usage of kind of the found footage, is that you can kind of see people interacting with each other who are forced to live in these very small spaces for, like you said, almost 2 years or so on just the trip out there. So I'll stop talking and let Lisa chime in now. And
Well, Matt, I want to say I really like the way you were describing this film's use of the found footage trope, because I completely agree. And I thought it was really smart that you said that this was kind of the least contrived. And you're absolutely right. A lot of times I think found footage in horror, especially, I mean, it can be effective, but it does feel a little bit of a cheat in a way, because I mean, the nature of found footage is that you generally know, okay, this footage was found, so the people went missing or something bad happened to them. And now we're kind of the detectives putting it together. Like, Blair Witch really set that model, I think, for found footage films. And in those cases, it's fine. I love those films. But I think that the found footage aspect of it becomes just a vehicle for the horror. Like, ooh, let's see what kind of scary stuff we're going to see on the film when we start watching it. And there's a little bit of the kind of forbidden aspect of it too. Like, what are we going to see? But with this film, it was using it in a really smart way, because and they tied it in thematically throughout the film as well, because we're watching scientists and we're watching these astronauts go out on a mission for the sole purpose of discovery. It makes complete sense, like you said, that they are filming everything. But then that ties in so well with what the film is doing about like, because several times there were lines throughout. One was repeated by the captain where, the question was like, what if we get out here? What if we've done this and we don't find anything? And he says a couple of times, even if we find nothing, it's an effective discovery, which I thought was really interesting because I was like, yeah, that's the point. They're just going to see and document and show it back to Earth. Of course, I'm not going to jump ahead to the ending, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but that becomes like a key part in what happens in the ending is this idea that they are there to gather evidence and to show what previously has not been shown. And then there was also kind of the greater theme too, I think, of what they're willing to sacrifice. I think it was the captain, the same one who said that, Shu, the character William Shu, where he said like what sometimes like he thinks if it's all worth it because they have to travel so long to get out there and then obviously do the mission and then travel back. And he mentions that his son will be 6 years old by the time he returns. And when that little detail really gutted me because I thought, oh, you feel the enormity of what these people are giving up for what they're doing. And I don't know, I just thought it was a really nice kind of look at like, what are we willing to give up in order to like make this great discovery for mankind? Are we willing to give up not just like lives, because obviously this is a dangerous mission, but are we willing to give up like time that could be spent with our loved ones or, big chunks of our own life that we could be doing other things with? I don't know. It was exploring these really big themes and it was all tied to this idea of the footage that they were getting because that was their mission. And so, yeah, I thought it was a really interesting and smart use of the found footage trope that I really haven't seen too much. Now, that being said, just the film itself, I've never seen this film. I enjoyed it. I feel like in lesser hands, this film would have been like, oh no, there's something outside the ship. And then most of the movie would then be them fighting off some sort of alien species. And again, it was it was a quieter film than that, which I appreciated. It kept me very engaged, even though it was a little bit quieter. I will say, I think I've mentioned this before, the idea of deep space is the same like feeling that I get when I think about the oceans and like the really deep parts of the ocean, which is why I don't think I could ever go on like a cruise. I certainly could never go out into outer space in a spaceship. It's this like existential dread that is mixed with claustrophobia, and that permeates this entire film. And then when I realized this film was going to touch on not only like deep space horror, but also like the we're under the water horror. Like it was both at once. My anxiety levels were very high watching this film. um, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but it was effective. It was effective in building the dread. It didn't rely on like jump scares or anything like that. It was like a constant turning of like, here's a little bit more dread, here's a little bit more dread. And overall, it was a really well done movie. But I mean, even describing it now, I'm thinking of certain images in the film, mainly when they were looking at the water on Europa, and I'm getting a knot in my stomach. Just thinking about it. It was so stressful, but I blame you, Mel.
Sorry about that. Giving you nightmares.
Oh, it totally gave me nightmares.
Well, for all the dread, and I agree, there was definitely a couple of moments in particular that really make you never want to go into space ever. But I was struck by just the cinematography of it, because even though it is found footage and is mostly shown inside the capsule or the ship or whatever they're in, there are some moments where they include quote unquote feeds from the external cameras. And when they actually get to Europa, they detach this part that's going to just stay in orbit around Europa while the rest of the module lands on the surface. There's an absolutely gorgeous shot of the moon and the ice and everything, and this little tiny orbital thing. I mean, they did a really fantastic job of playing up the space can be really pretty too. Pretty but deadly, but can be pretty.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I liked about this movie. I mean, I'm agreeing with basically everything that you guys are saying. I think that the dread and the anxiety is a big aspect of it, just because of the material they're dealing with, but also the way they handle it. But yeah, I mean, the when they show the external camera and you realize how far away they are from Earth, like I think it's right when they lose communication, they're almost like they can just see like Earth's moon, I think, but not necessarily Earth because of the solar flare that happens. And then when it shifts to the forward view and you can see Jupiter's coming, I mean, I really feel like you feel a little bit of what you don't feel like, but the isolation and the terror, especially once they have their accident that causes the communication to be lost, like that is a big effect on their behavior and their morale and how they feel and how they make their decisions after that. But just, yeah, I mean, the anticipation of going not only further than anyone's ever gone before, because that's another thing that Williams says is not only is a discovery if there's nothing there, we've still gone further than anybody else has gone before. But also, yeah, the beauty of it, like to just see Jupiter that closely, and the landscape of Europa is done so well. I mean, it's very, I mean, I'm no scientist, but I feel like it's very believable based on the story that they're telling us and what they're preparing us for. But also, it just gets the idea of an alien landscape so well. And I don't know, I think cosmic fear is just done perfectly in this movie, because I think we've talked before about how cosmic fear is like the unknown. So it can be what's under the water and what's in outer space. And like you said, Lisa, this takes both of them, because you're not only going into outer space looking for something and do you want to find it or not? They're looking for a single celled organism, but what they find is so much more complicated. But yeah, I mean, they're going to be underwater on an alien planet. And that was just really fascinating to me, because it's just, yeah, I mean, it ups the terror in a way. Like their first accident, they actually lose someone who goes off into space in a spacesuit, and it's horrifying. And his last words are questioning whether he should have come or not. But yeah, then they set foot on an alien landscape. So yeah, I thought it handled like the ratcheting up of the tension and also like the different kinds of horror really well. But then at the same time, while you're terrified, you're also like, wow. Like when Katya is looking at the landscape, she's like, nobody's ever seen this before. Like there's also a really creepy beauty to it at the same time.
Yeah, and you can feel their excitement and kind of awe and wonder with it. Like I think it is when, yeah, it is Katya who is out taking samples, and she meets her end when she sees like a light out in the distance, and she's just so curious about it and has to know what it is. And of course that ends up not working out so well for her, but there was like a beauty in it. I also don't know if I've ever seen one of these films deal with, and again, it's like the theme of, and I wish I had written down the line. One of the astronauts early on says something like, what does one individual life really mean in comparison to like the potential of a big discovery that we're doing?
I actually wrote it down.
Did you? Okay, tell me.
It's Rosa, the pilot, and she said when they decide that it's okay well, it's not okay, but when they decide to let Katya go outside, she says, compared to the breadth of the knowledge yet to be known, what does your life actually matter? Yeah, and she says that twice, I think. I think she says it at the end, yeah, before she makes her choice, yeah.
Yeah. So I really loved the exploration of that theme about, kind of like this idea of like how significant is an individual life in comparison really to the cosmos, which again is kind of leaning into that cosmic horror too that you were talking about. even though they're doing it in a different way, like the smallness of their life is almost again a thing of beauty because they're part of something so much bigger. But then after that, there are a couple of deaths that, and one of them is the guy who goes, what, who, I can't remember his name, who ends up going out. It's
James, the guy that floats away.
James.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. James, the guy who floats away, and then later with the ending, which again, I know we're going to talk about the ending, but I've never seen a film like this that talks about and kind of ruminates over the idea of death first, because they know that it could happen, that they're going to end up giving their lives for this. So it's introduced, but then later when we actually see the deaths happen on screen, number one, it's not sensationalized. It's not a big fight scene. It's not a big attack. There's no blood. There's no gore. It's very quiet death scenes, but the film stays on them. Like when James floats out, we as the audience are with him, kind of until he takes his last breath, and we're there long enough to see him think, okay, I've taken this idea of like death is a possibility that could happen to death is a reality that is happening, and having to like reckon with his choices in that moment. And that was really powerful, because almost with the exception of the captain, I think it's the captain who falls after the ship crashes when they try to take off, and then it messes up and they crash back down. All of the other deaths, the people know that death is coming. They recognize, at least a few moments beforehand that, oh, death is coming. And I don't know, it was just really interesting to see this film like not shy away from that, and really to kind of sit, like it was almost philosophical in the way it approached it, which was really interesting. Again, even talking about it, I'm getting the knot in my stomach because that's a very uncomfortable topic to deal with. But I thought it was really interesting the way the film approached it.
I completely agree. And I definitely want to not move too quickly from what you've brought up here with the topic of death, because it's handled so interestingly, like you said, in this movie. And it almost, in some ways, I kind of think of this movie as kind of an inverse of something like Apollo 13, where we know the fates of both of them going into the movies. If you know history, you know that Apollo 13, they do survive, but it's very perilous and harrowing. And we know going into this that they most likely did die. And then, you start watching the movie and that's pretty much the first thing they tell you is that nobody came back. And the scene specifically for James when he's floats away from the space station, and I mean, for those of you that haven't seen it and have not minded our spoilers so far, what kind of happens is he and Andre, one of the other astronauts, are doing a spacewalk to fix the communication system, and there's an accident, and Andre's suit gets punctured, so he's leaking air, and James actually guides him back to the airlock because Andre is starting to lose consciousness because he's very critically low on air. And that's when they realize that James is covered in hydrazine, which I'm not a chemist. I know nothing about hydrazine, but they did a very good job of explaining that if he came into the rest of the ship, it would cause the air to become toxic to everyone else. And according to IMDb, it's extremely corrosive and toxic. So, Andre is trying to fight with him to find a way to, help clean off the hydrazine or something. And basically, James kind of throws him in, and uncouples himself and tells them to shut the airlock, and they all know that that's the right decision. I mean, he's sacrificing himself for everyone else on the ship. But yeah, like you said, Lisa, we get his reaction and even a view from his cameras on his suit as he's, talking to them and partially to himself. And you literally watch the ship like going away in the distance. I mean, that is extremely hard to watch and very powerful. And like it had a huge impact on me. I kind of the opposite of you. I would love to go to space. I would love to do that sort of thing. Watching that, I was like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I kind of would reconsider that if someone gave me the offer, just because I know that that would be a possibility. And well, like you said, he even kind of questions his decision, and not, I guess, not so much saving Andre, but just that whole, I'm not going to see my kid grow up. I'm dying out here in space. This is a reality. I'm just going to be a floating object in space soon. And that's just extremely powerful. And yeah, it really hit me pretty hard watching that, even knowing, because it's alluded to earlier that he had died in some sort of accident, and even knowing that something has happened to him, watching it was really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure what else I could add, but yeah, that idea of just floating off into the vacuum of space and becoming a floating object, like you mentioned, Matt, is just utterly terrifying. And I think, I mean, in some ways, it helps to, they're having to deal with this, emotionally as they continue on their mission, because they decide, I mean, that they should continue. But at the same time, I think it also, like, we don't see all of them get taken out by landing on Europa or taking off, like William, who sacrifices himself to try to help them there. And we don't see them all get attacked by the creature that they ultimately find on Europa. We see someone die in a way that's very plausible, and it was something that they kind of knew they might have signed on for, and or that might happen when they signed up for this. And I thought that was interesting. It's not just like, well, it's going to all be the alien attacking people and they're trying to fight it off or whatever. It's very kind of, I mean, realistic to issues that these astronauts would face on this first long distance flight. And to have that kind of central trauma be kind of the center of the movie, because you don't see it until they're trying to make their decisions about Europa. I don't know. It was very affecting to an audience member, and I think it worked really well in like creating his character before you see the accident happen, and then seeing how it affected them lended it a little bit more terror and emotional weight. And plus, I mean, that was just something that could have happened to them from the very beginning. It had nothing to do with the horror of finding some creature. Katya's death, I thought, was really interesting in that respect too. I mean, she knows she could be sacrificing herself at that point. The drill didn't work properly. They landed in the wrong place. The ice is cracking. They know it's a radiation danger to go outside the ship. So, I mean, she's in even more danger. It's not like it's something that they could have trained for 100%, like a spacewalk. And she still goes. And when she goes after the phosphorescence under the ice, and when the creature apparently pulls her under, you're still with her camera long enough to see her eyes and her face as she sees the creature coming. I mean, you even see the creature reflected in her pupils, which I thought was just terrifying, because we're seeing in some ways an inverse of the last thing she saw. And then, of course, you have the horror of the people on the ship who are replaying the parts of the video that they were able to get, like listening to her breathing, seeing that reflection. I mean, that's the moment when they know that there's something truly not just like alien, but something that's not a single cell organism. Like, they understand that the threat is a lot higher than they thought it was. And again, yeah, Lisa, I think you're right. I mean, all the deaths, there's that moment where the person knows it's going to happen. And it's almost more terrifying than if you see like the I guess the violent end of it, whatever the creature is going to do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about the creature at some point. When Katya was going out towards the light, and they said, back when they were watching back on the ship, and they realized that this was like the trademarks of a complex organism and not a single cell organism, that sent shivers up my spine. It was just the way this movie uses just like the hint of an image, like you said, like you see a lot of things in reflections, or you'll see people's faces like really close up where the camera will only be looking at like their eyes or a hand. But even just like the subtlety of language in this film is really kind of beautiful. It's definitely, it gives you just enough to walk that fine line between terror and horror, I think. Really, really well. But I feel like, I mean, while we're talking about the deaths and like the creature and all that, I think we do need to talk about the ending, because the ending I thought was really breathtaking for a couple of different ways. So after they've lost two of their members of their crew and they realize that they've got what they need, they, yeah, at least they've got, you know, some semblance of of documentation. They decide that really their only mission is to get back home and take back what they know. And so they try to take off, and of course they crash and they lose another member, and they realize that they can't, you know, they can't leave. I think at one point, and I didn't write down who said it, but somebody had said, "This is it, it's happening, this is the end." And you know, that kind of the idea that we've been talking about recognizing the finality of death, and when it's coming for you. But at the end we do, and Mel, I think you had mentioned this to me when we were texting, in a weird way we kind of get a final girl in this, even though nobody really comes out alive. And I mean, we know that from the beginning of the movie, but at the end we have the character of Rosa, who realizes her situation just like everybody else. She realizes that they can't fix the ship, that they can't take off again. You know, there's no hope of like a rescue mission. You know, they're too far out for that. But she realizes at one point that communication has been reestablished. And this is that, again, the kind of thematic thing that they were grappling with in this movie, which is that everybody's here for this mission and it's bigger than them and it's bigger than their individual lives. And she makes a decision that she is going to not only choose her own death, because frankly, she has several grim options, but she knows that the world is going to see this at some point. And she wants the world to see exactly what they've all been seeing out there. And so she makes the choice to kind of open the airlock and let in that icy water. And when she does that, you know, it was really kind of powerful, because you see a mixture of like her terror of facing the moment, but also this kind of childlike wonder of, I'm seeing something that nobody else has really seen. And I'm experiencing something for the first time that nobody's experienced. I don't know. There was I know we've used the word beautiful a lot, but like there was a lot of beautiful terror in that moment. I don't know. What did y'all think about the ending?
I felt like the ending was kind of breathtaking for such a kind of understated film. And I know sometimes when you show the monster, it can kind of be a letdown, but I thought it was, I was not let down at all. I thought it was the kind of, in some ways, the best way to show it. And I totally agree with you. I think there was terror, but also curiosity. Like she's like, I'm going to see what this thing is that's been menacing us to a certain extent. And also just the discovery aspect of it, that it's something they never could have seen coming. One thing I was thinking while you were talking, Lisa, that I think again, I guess this is how tightly put together this is. At the very end, Andre thinks that he and the scientist, I can't remember his name now, the other scientist, not Katya, because she's dead at that point, can go out and fix the frozen fuel line, and then they will shut off a couple of their other systems and at least make it back. And it's going to be very difficult to get back to Earth because they are going to be cramped in like one area because they had to jettison their water shield, so they're getting irradiated. I mean, it's a mess, and they're probably going to die, but they're still working on something. And when Andre realizes that the other guy is dead, and he knows, kind of, you can see on his face that he kind of knows what the creature is, he and Rosa kind of decide that he's just going to cut off all life support so that she has enough power for communication. And I just thought that was interesting with the theme. Like, what do our lives matter with the breadth of knowledge that we can find? And they choose to cut off life support just to be able to send all the information back to Earth. Now, of course, they're going to die anyway, but I just thought that was a really interesting thematic point, that even at the very end, she knows she's going to freeze and lose oxygen soon anyway, so why not look at the thing and see what it was for herself and send that back. And I just thought that was, I mean, the whole movie kind of hewed to those themes so tightly from beginning to end. I really appreciated that, in addition to seeing the bioluminescent octopus. Which I have to admit, I was about to have a panic attack with I do not like water at all. And the water coming into the airlock and filling, that was enough to give me a panic attack, not just the octopus coming in.
Same. In fact, I think the octopus coming in actually helped to dissipate my panic attack, because when I saw the water bubbling up, I was like, oh no, I can't. Like, I cannot watch this. This is my worst nightmare. And then I kind of chuckled because I agree with you. I'm glad they showed the monster, but there was at least a part of me that thought, oh, that's where Cthulhu came from. He he comes from Jupiter's moon. But
well,
yeah,
maybe I'm going to be pedantic here, but I don't choose to call it the monster. I've been thinking of it in my head as the alien, because yes, this has a lot of creature feature sort of elements. You've got the people that are getting picked off one by one and dying, but I don't know. I kept thinking, well, from the alien's point of view, it's trying to figure out what they are just as much as they're trying to figure out what it is. And I couldn't help but think that if the alien does have some sort of consciousness or self-awareness, how is it going to know that they can't breathe underwater if all of it and its compatriots can breathe underwater, you know? So I don't know. I'm not saying I have sympathy for it, but I don't know. For me, the word monster does feel a little bit harsh to it, when it could have just been as curious as they were. Not to steer things too far away, because I did want to also say that
No, and I agree with you, actually.
Yeah,
when I said
same.
monster, I kind of was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that, because yeah, I mean, it's just living its life. You're totally right. Yeah, I agree with that. It doesn't know anything about them. It could see them as a threat, even.
It's a complex organism. I mean, that's the way
Yes,
they refer to it on the ship, and I think that's probably the best way to describe it, because they're looking at it from a scientist's point of view. And you're right, like, it never really did menace them, not in the same way like an alien or monster would if this were a true creature feature.
Yeah, and I think that's where the beauty comes at the end too, because it's a creature that no human's ever seen before that we don't understand, as opposed to it's just going to like murder me. So yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, Matt.
Well, and I didn't want to get too far away from what you were both saying about the ending. I don't know that I have much else to add. I completely agree that it was quite the heroic death that she chose to sacrifice herself, knowing that she was going to die regardless, to actually open the airlock so that other people could get a look at this monster as much as her as well. But yeah, like, and I just used the word monster myself. Oh gosh. But yeah, that was something that I'd started thinking about throughout the movie, once it becomes apparent that yes, it's not just bacteria and algae. And I mean, they hint that there's probably some sort of complex organism, even from the beginning of the movie. But once it really becomes apparent that there is something there, I kept thinking, well, here is this thing that has evolved in an ocean sort of aquatic setting, I guess, under a thick layer of ice on a moon of Jupiter, and all of a sudden there's this weird thing that's bored through the ice. I mean, wouldn't we go, hey, what's that? And try to get a better look. And of course, if aliens came to Earth, you would expect them to be able to breathe air just as much as us. But if you remember when we did the movie Arrival, those aliens, they had a different habit. I don't know what the word is, but they breathe different stuff. I'm not a scientist here. So yeah, it was just something that I kept thinking about as the movie progressed. And yes, I didn't necessarily feel sympathy with it. I did feel more sympathy with the humans as they were dying in various ways, but it was something that I did want to bring up as we were talking about it, because yeah, I mean, it was just living its best life, and suddenly these apes in a tin can landed on its home.
So basically, it was experiencing cosmic horror because this world was being invaded.
Well, from a certain point of view, yes. But that being said, one thing I had also wanted to mention just in our overall discussion of this is, because I know I don't remember which one of you did, but one of you mentioned Alien, like the xenomorph, the Ridley Scott. After watching this movie, I would love to see a version of that was done as found footage. I think that could be a really interesting take on the Alien franchise. But that's kind of a tangent there. But yeah, I know it's kind of a bit of a tangent there, but like I was saying, I think it would be interesting to see found footage in like Ridley Scott's xenomorph type thing. But well, I know that's kind of an odd place to end it, but we have kind of literally reached the end of the movie, and I don't know that there's a whole lot else that we could say about Europa Report. For those of you that have listened all the way through but haven't seen it yet, definitely take this as a strong recommendation from all three of us that it's definitely worth watching. It's a very good, very, very, very well done movie. So before we go, though, did want to mention again, for those of you that listen with your screens off or with us in the background, that if you haven't checked it out yet, we've got some new artwork that we used the money from our Patreon site to commission. We're super proud of it, super happy with it. And if you haven't taken a second, just, turn on your phone screen or tab on over to the tab where we are and just take a look at it. Because again, it really doesn't do anything for us except just give us a nice, good feeling to have this new artwork, but we're absolutely in love with it. Also, you can get your own versions of this new artwork if you're interested. We do have some merchandise that's available now on our website. Head on over to No Fearcast. That's KNOW Fearcast.com if you're interested, and take a look at the merchandise. We've got a couple of different options. My wife actually purchased the hoodie option with our artwork on it, and it's a really nice hoodie. I'll be honest, it's really soft, and she's gotten mad at me for trying to steal it from her. But if you want to reach out to us, we're at No Fearcast on Twitter and Instagram. We have a Facebook page as well. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com, and we love getting emails from all of you. So please feel free to reach out by email, but also you can use Facebook as well to reach out, and you can message us on Facebook Messenger. If you love what we're doing, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. You do get access to exclusive content. We release mini episodes on the weeks that we are not releasing main episodes. But if that's not something that you're able to do right now, and we completely understand that, you can definitely just rate and review us. That's 100% free, but is a huge help for us. It helps other listeners find us. Our theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini. Thanks for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.